And welcome back to Frankly Speaking. This is now volume 10 of the Integralist Chronicles. So really in the first 9 volumes of this series that I'm doing now, which is basically me kind of telling you my story in a way and how I see it relate sort of to the greater elements of the culture and politics in America as I was growing up throughout the duration of my life. And I think in the first 9 episodes, I talked mostly about the sexual revolution and the destructive nature the sexual revolution had on everybody, not just Americans per se, but even immigrants, right? Particularly as an Italian first generation here, I saw radical transformation of American culture, Italian culture. I saw it in the Croatian community. I've seen the Hispanic community, which were predominant areas or predominant sort of populations where I came from. Those were kind of the demographics. But I think there was another factor that started right in the 1980s, and that is the prosperity and the wealth, particularly as a result of the usury system. I remember still being a young lad. My memories of the 70s are vague, but I do have some from the late 70s. I was born in 71. And by the time we get to the 80s, I still remember most in the community I hung out with, they were still very frugal. They came over from the old country looking for prosperity. But now we're getting to the late 80s. And I would say, as we get into the years 84, 85, and all the way through 89, the end of the Ronald Reagan presidency, the housing market now is starting to move up. We're out of the Jimmy Carter malaise years. Paul Volcker works with the interest rates and things like that and pulls us out of inflation. And as we all know, really the story is, and it's true in large part, that there was a massive economic boom under Ronald Reagan. It was good times. And a lot of that, again, was reflected in the culture. As, we saw it on TV with shows like Dynasty and sort of the uppity kind of shows that depicted prosperity and wealth, things like that. But we saw it in real life as most people began to prosper. They moved up the economic engine of prosperity, up the corporate ladder and things of that nature, and Americans were prospering. And I think for many immigrants, it was strange because there was a big difference between my grandparents' generation and my parents' generation, right? My grandparents' generation was born in the old country. My parents' generation, they could have been born over there or they were born here. A lot of them were born over there, but because they were liberalized, because they came here very young or were born here and were educated in the States, well, liberal values were adopted pretty fast. Now, for my parents, they were born both in the old country and they were both not educated in America, right? So liberalism never crept into my immediate home. But other Italians that came here very young as part of immigration that were educated here, they went to the educational system and liberalism creeped in. And a lot of this ideas of the American dream creeped in because it was real. America saw that at the time. And so as prosperity increased, I think a lot of people lost themselves in the midst of materialism. I mean, I still remember, again, the late 70s, early 80s, and the frugalness of Italian immigrants and Croatian immigrants and how we're all trying to survive. We're here to make money, because that was really the end goal for most immigrants that came here, at least from Italy, right? It's funny because we hear all these horror stories of people escaping for freedom and liberty, like Cuba or the Soviet Union or the Eastern Bloc. Italians didn't escape for any of those reasons. They came here for one reason alone, and that is we were sold on the American dream. We were here to work. And even one of my subscribers reminded me of her Italian heritage, that particularly talking about our grandparents' generation, they never even learned, a lot of them, the English language. They never wanted to. They never wanted to be American. They were just here to work. And I think we still have a lot of that, to be honest with you. And so that's why the whole assimilation thing has always been complex in America, because to be honest, nobody really knows what you're assimilating to when you come to America, right? I mean, we got these abstract ideas, freedom, liberty, but we never had really any culture in America, right? I mean, we have regions of it, right? We have some culture up in the Northeast. We got some down in Louisiana, which is more Catholic than anything else, right? There's regional. But generally, as Americans, we were never sold on these sort of abstract ideas. We're just here to make the money, just like a lot of immigrants came here for those reasons. And you know what? In large part, people are making the money in America starting in the 80s. They're doing very well. Call it a usury system, call it the abuse of money manipulation, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of that going on, but people are really living pretty well by the time the late 80s comes up. And I begin to see a lot of this, right? As especially within the housing market, the buying, the selling, the housing values are going up. People are being empowered because the house is really your biggest asset that you use to really move around in life. Now we have things like 401ks, but most of that comes toward the end of your life and to try and maintain you. A house is a big asset for people that are lower class or lower middle class. It could elevate you pretty fast. And it's what I witnessed. But along with that, that idea came a lot of problems, right? Particularly as American liberalism breaks down the concepts of true faith and true religion. There's no cultural reinforcement of any particular faith. In the midst of chasing this material prosperity, the faith is lost. And in many ways, the pursuits of materialism, making the money in America, again, everything that comes along with that, along with the sexual revolution, it really begins to consume a lot of people. And that's why, in many respects, a lot of people that I talk to would tell you, does America really have a soul in many respects, right? Because we don't know what the culture is. We don't know what the faith is in many ways, right? We just kind of go to America to work. We make the best of it. We're good neighbors. We're good citizens. We follow the laws of the land. We respect the laws. We always did that. We love the country. It's the country that loves us. It's the country that takes care of us. Let's put it that way, right? It's a country that protects us. It's our home, without a doubt. We've adopted it in many ways. We're following the rules as best we know. We're being good citizens. We were all good citizens, right? We're most immigrants, especially from Western Europe, were upstanding citizens for the most part. And but the question is what is an American, right? That's the big question, and that's the question that was never really answered adequately in that respect. We're a pluralistic society. We got a bunch of private property laws that are trying to keep uniformity and order within society. And for many years, I guess it worked, right? I think we're seeing the breakdown of that now. But I think it was in this pursuit of materialism that a lot of people got lost as well, too. And this combined with the loss of faith has been deadly. And so that's why when you look at America today and what it's become, it's the pursuit of, again, prosperity, materialism, and a hypersexualized culture. It's become, again, the materialistic dialectic in many respects. And with that, there's some good things, obviously, right? We're all living well. We're all fat. We're all happy in a sense that we have all of our basic needs, something that oftentimes in other parts of the world we didn't have, even though I think there's nuances there that we can discuss. But for the most part, Americans have lived large and happy. And that's been one of the great blessings of America. But on the other hand, to attain these material ends, and again, dealing with the sexual revolution in and of itself without any moral order to control man's fallen nature, we've lost ourselves in the process, and everybody's lost themselves. Listen, I critique Protestants because we saw the broken Protestant family when we first got here, right? I mean, I was born here, don't get me wrong. I'm talking about when I started going to school, but it's not really much longer after that, a decade. We get into the late 80s, early 90s, and we're now starting to see the Catholic families collapse pretty fast. Now, I would argue the apostasy by the late 80s is full blown. It's we're having problems in the Catholic Church. The Protestant churches have all collapsed, at least the old line Protestant churches. They've liberalized in many respects. And what's happened is, again, I think with American culture and the way we look at faith and religion as these privatized moral codes, we're heading toward a cliff at that moment as the faith is being lost. And in many respects, materialism becomes our God, right? And the first time I started to notice this, as kind of a rational adult as I'm growing up, was when I really started listening to talk radio in the mid to late 90s, when I was listening to guys like Rush and Hannity, things like that. Whenever we talked about the greatness of America, it will always center around these abstract ideas, freedom and liberty, but it also centered around the economic prosperity and how we all live great lives and how we all have these great opportunities, how we all have these technological advancements and these great medicine. Our lives are living longer now and things like that, right? It's all centered around the material world. Again, the materialistic dialectic. And that's where I think a lot of souls were lost. When you combine the sexual revolution with the materialistic, again, dialectic, it's a recipe for disaster. And I think you look all across the globe where liberalism has kind of governed and been in charge of things. This is the ideas they've pushed. This is basically the ideas of the French Revolution, right? I mean, the American Revolution too, but some would say the French Revolution for Europeans was absolutely disastrous, how it changed the whole paradigm shift of what the European continent was. And when you mix that with the fact that you had a couple of great world wars in the middle of the 20th century, and how liberalism was imposed on the rest of Europe, well, now all of Europe is transcending toward this kind of liberal end now all of a sudden, because they're forced to adopt a lot of these values, and we're forced to drop a lot of the values of the old world, a lot of it which were centered around spirituality and faith in the church itself. And I think, listen, by the time we got to the late 90s, we're in the midst of the Clinton administration. We had gone through a recession at the end of the George W. Bush administration, the first George Bush administration. And the housing market stays pretty flat throughout the early and mid 90s. But toward the end of the 90s, right around the end of 97, 98, here comes the big boom, right? The boom that will last all the way to 2008 collapse, the financial collapse there. But by the late 90s, we're seeing a massive paradigm shift in how people look at money and housing. And what I remember being from a very how should I put this, uppity bedroom community in Southern California that I lived in, there was embellishment in not only just acquiring material wealth, but also showing off, right? Showing your, what you had, and being part of this cultural movement where you're supposed to show what you have. Let's put it that way. It's funny because I had a friend of mine, Italian friend of mine, who saw a lot of this embellishment, especially amongst Italians, because that's what we were. That's who we knew. That's who we congregated with. And he said, "Look at these Italians, right? They came here from Italy with holes in their shoes, and now they buy a house and they make a few, transactions. Housing market goes up, and now they think they're all big shots now, right? Driving around Mercedes and SUVs now, and having a 6-bedroom house and things like that." It was kind of funny, actually, because there was a lot of truth to that, right? Because what I noticed was by the end of the 90s, when the housing boom is moving along, it all became about, all right, what kind of house do you have? How many bedrooms do you have? Do you have your granite countertops? Do you have your stainless steel appliances, right? It is this infatuation with collecting materialism and how big and elegant your house is, because the bigger and more elegant and the more, I guess, amenities you had is a status symbol of that American culture, right? You got to have your SUV. At the time, the plasma TVs are starting to come out, and you got to have all the goodies set up in your house. And the more you had, the more you were able to show off to your family, your friends, your neighbors. It became an infatuation to really show how you have succeeded. Your material success was part of your cultural identity. Now, this is different in the old world where, don't get me wrong, materialism always played a role, but the faith countered some of those disordered passions. And because the church has always taught that we put God first, not materialism first, not this world first, there was a counterbalance in the old world. But in America, where true religion is not acknowledged, not ever acknowledged, right? It's all personal moral codes now. You began to see Americans worship at the altar of materialism. And this is what talk radio is pushing. Why is America great? Because we are an economic power. We give opportunity to everybody, and everybody can climb up the economic engine of prosperity and sort of the class sort of system ladder and advance and achieve and buy more. And then guess what? When you buy more and you spend more and more and more and accumulate more and more and more material stuff, you're providing jobs for people. See, you're a saint in many ways by constantly accumulating material items, because now there's a whole system of these sort of this, the invisible hand that works through the economy. We're all buying stuff. We all have jobs now. We're all living the good life now. But in the process, what the right never talks about is through, again, this material dialectic, how we all lost our souls because we began to worship at the altar of materialism. And in that process, listen, you can't worship two gods at the same time. And a lot of people were lost in the midst. And it really led us to the 2008 collapse, because I know a lot of people want to blame the banks, right, for what happened, for giving out all these bad loans. And then at the end of the day, the banks were bailed out by the government, while Main Street, average everyday people were left to rot. And I get that. It's disgraceful. It's terrible government policy. I get that. But I'm going to come to you from my perspective and what I saw living in an uppity kind of bedroom community in Southern California. It wasn't just the banks. It was people that lost the faith, became enamored by materialism, and they just wanted to live the good life. I mean, it really became a situation in many parts of this country where if you bought a house, you could quit your job and just live off your house. I saw a lot of that. Remortgaging houses, buying, selling, buying time, buying a bigger house, selling this house, renting this house outright. And it became this pursuit of materialism in many ways. And this was the disease that was really sweeping the nation. And while the banks definitely deserve their blame, you got to blame those that took the loans out, because I was in that world too at that time. I was at that point mid to late 20s, and the question I was asking myself, okay, do I jump on the bandwagon, buy a house? The housing market's going up and up and up. But I'm the kind of guy that was raised, at least from my old-fashioned parents, with this idea of cash on the barrel, right? If you can't afford it, you don't buy it. You don't buy it. But American economics is different. It's a usury system. If you believe in that old method of cash on the barrel, you actually fall behind in this American economy. What you're supposed to really do, if you've done this, you profited. You go out there and buy more than what you can afford. Don't worry about the payment. There's shenanigans and things like that that you can do to kind of manage, but just wait a few months. Your house will go up in value, and then you can just sell it. You don't need to be able to afford your house. And this is kind of the housing situation we have today. Well, that kind of irresponsibility leads to 2008 and the financial collapse. But my point is that, the right says to me, at least when I was in it, personal responsibility matters. And I agree with that. And the banks should be held to personal responsibility for what they did. But individuals taking out loans more than what they could afford was also an issue of personal responsibility. And I knew people who were like making, we had average household incomes of $40,000, $50,000, and they were buying houses $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. The math never made sense at all. And that's why starting in 2003, 2004, I started to call the collapse. Now, I was off by about 4 years because through money manipulation and things like that, we can extend these things, at least the government can, for longer. But I said, this doesn't make sense. People that are bringing home $2,000, $3,000 a month, after taxes, they got a $2,000 a month mortgage. It didn't make any sense. And that's when I was first buying my first house. Was right around, bought my first house at, what was it, end of 2003. And I had to move out of the bedroom community and go off to a more isolated community to be able to afford it. Now, in retrospect, if I knew what was coming down the pipe, I should have bought in that community, right? Regardless of what my payment was, hold on to it for 6 months and then sell it and make a profit. See, there's no incentive to do what was right, and people weren't doing what was right. A lot of people saw the scam for what it was and took advantage of it, but a lot of good people that wanted to do it the right way got stuck with the bill at the end of the day. That's the irony of it all. But there was a lot of, how should I say this? A lot of maliciousness going on with people buying and selling homes. It became a game in many respects. And I think for a large part, or for in many ways, I think a lot of people saw it as a way to get out of the usury system. And I think that's the issue with the housing market, is that it's the one asset people can use to elevate themselves pretty fast if they know how to work the housing market system. If you know how to get in and out, time it just right. Now, there's always danger in timing, but the housing has been the backbone of the middle class. That's why if we have another housing correction, it's going to hit the middle class hard, especially now with all this inflation that we have, and sort of the after effects and of these massive home prices and that we've bought into over the past 5 to 10 years now. A lot of the payments don't make sense. That's why the rents are out of control now. But we're in the late 90s now all of a sudden, and this game is being played by everybody that I'm seeing. And a part of it is people being enamored with materialism, with the ways of this new economy now that doesn't take into account, again, any types of elements of personal responsibility. You could go in and out of a housing market. And I'm not saying it's immoral in the sense that you can't go in and out. Some of these transactions are legitimate, but the problem is somebody eventually in any pyramid scheme is going to be left holding the bag at the bottom of the pyramid. And that's what we saw by 2008. And I guess this is my issue with the American economy, is that it's really unstable. A lot of us have profited. A lot of us have lived good, right? In many ways, but it is a system of peaks and valleys in many ways, right? A guy like Dave Ramsey would tell you that, well, the housing market always goes up. Well, we did have a recession in again, the early 90s, and then the 2008 collapse. We look like we're going to a slowdown in the housing market now. What is interesting about the American economics is you got to be sharp, you got to be savvy, you got to know when to get in, when to get out. And what it does is punishes people that really don't understand economics very well. And those people oftentimes get caught in bad economies. People buy at high markets because, listen, we just got married, we're starting a family. I can't wait for this economy to collapse. I can't wait another 2, 3, 4 years. I don't know when this housing market is going to adjust. We're going to buy in, and hopefully houses keep going up forever. But there's a basic dictate of supply and demand and what people can pay, especially in an economic system where wages haven't gone up for a long time. And these were the gains we're seeing by the late 90s, early 2000s, and many immigrants, and really all Americans for that matter, were being caught up with this. And it was just a time bomb ready to explode. And that's why it's interesting in the American economy. While we always talk about this great economic prosperity, there are large parts of the American people that every 10 years have to start all over again. Why? Because this thing always crashes down at some point again. And those that are not as savvy and business smart or economically smart always pay the price at the end of the day. And I know a lot of people that pay the price, lost their homes, had to start all over again. And I got a feeling we're probably going to go through something like that again, because this cycle has been, let's see here, 2011. It was November 2011 when this housing market finally turned and started to come back up. So now we're, again, 11 years into this thing. These housing cycles usually run 7 to 10 years, roughly on average, right? And now we're about 10, 11, almost 12 years into this thing. It's due for a correction, that apart from the fact that the prices are just too high. But again, I think the bottom line is the combination of sexual revolution, which is happening throughout that whole period of time. This materialism leads to, again, the continued apostasy that we're now living through. See, I've always argued that it wasn't just the moral issues that condemned America and really the West for that matter. Because, see, that's what the right will tell you, is that the left has come in with their social policies and all these disordered issues, and they've ruined the culture. Thus, they're destroying the West. It's more than that. There's a usury system. There's an economic system there. And I've said it all along. The attack has been on two fronts. It's been on the social issues, obviously, but it's also been with the usury system and the economics, right? Money manipulation, bank manipulations, things like that. And we've gotten to the point, even if this housing market or this economy doesn't crash, we just have levels of housing prices or living expenses that are far too high now at this point in history, where we have both parents in that respect. Well, in a lot of ways, people aren't having kids anymore, right? And the few of us that are having kids, with this, again, usury system that has made our living expenses so high that both parents have been pushed out into the workforce. And guess who's watching the kids here at night? It's MTV, it's porn, it's everything that is morally decadent, that's destroying our children's generation. It's part and parcel of why we're dealing with this lost woke generation, which is the byproduct of the late 90s. That 90s generation that I told you is where I believe American morality, American culture, and the American family came to an end, where it all collapsed. That's what we're dealing with now. And part of that process has been starting really with the inflation in the 1970s, pushing the woman out into the workforce, having both parents out there to, again, support the usury system, pay the mortgage every month, pay the bills every month, pay the car payments every month in that respect, and then nobody home to raise kids, or you just contracept, or you just abort your kids. And now we're not even having a kids in a lot of different ways, right? As our population rates are dying. This has been a two-pronged attack. Socially, yes. Culturally, yes. Morally, yes. But also on the economic front, it's been through the usury system. And that part of it, a lot has to do with the right-wing politics, conservative politics, economic politics that have hurt the family in America. All you had to do was listen to talk radio in the late 90s, early 2000s. Remember what I told you before, the corporations, right? Now the political right says the corporations are evil, right? They're fascistic, right? But the right was supporting corporations. The right was supporting these big institutions in the name of freedom and liberty. And in many ways, it has been those corporations that have hammered small businesses and have left people sort of to fend for themselves in lower paying wages now. And now we have Americans scrambling to try and figure out how to survive in a usury system that has been detrimental to everybody, the individuals, the families, women particularly, right? Because the feminist movement will tell you, well, women were liberated through feminism. Listen, where I come from, a lot of women never wanted to go into the workforce. They wanted to stay home and raise their kids. That's their natural inkling. And you can't deny that of a woman. You can't take that away. But through our usury system, it has been taken away. That's why so many people are miserable. Or should I say, so many women are miserable. Do the statistics, do the studies, watch them. Women are generally much more miserable than men in our culture. Why? Because their biological calling, their status of their natural order, natural law has been disrupted by users' economic system, one that has gutted us of our soul, gutted us of our culture, and destroyed our family. This has been a two-pronged attack from the left and the right. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. This is Frank. This is volume 10 of the Integralist Chronicles. Economics, ladies and gentlemen, just as destructive as the social policies that have destroyed culture and family. This is Frank, signing out for Frankie Speaking. Good night, everybody.